Hello, everyone, and welcome to this week's episode of Recovery Talk. First off, my voice. I know it sounds a little bit different. I currently have COVID. It's been a rough few days, but I'm starting to feel a bit better. So I want to start this episode by saying if you have not yet gotten vaccinated, I would strongly encourage you to do so. I am triple vaccinated and I've been feeling really quite ill. And I'm just thinking, if I didn't have those 3 vaccines, I'm honestly nervous about what I would have been going through right now. Remember, vaccines don't protect you from getting COVID. It offers a little bit protection from getting COVID. It reduces your risk a bit. But mainly what it does is protecting against severe illness. I have been feeling sick the last few days, but I've not been in danger, right? And that's what the vaccines protect you against. But considering how sick I've been feeling, again, thinking about going through this without that vaccine protection really scares me. I understand some people are skeptical to vaccines and don't quite understand it, and I'm not here to make fun of those people. I also understand that some communities have had especially bad experiences with the medical system and has, doubt towards it as a result. But I want to remind you that in a lot of countries right now, the strategy is essentially just to let COVID run its course. And I understand if you're skeptical to vaccines, but aren't you also skeptical to getting COVID without any kind of protection? If you find vaccines a little bit scary and confusing and you don't quite understand what is going in your body and all of these things, one thing that I would recommend you to do is to actually watch some videos or read some things about how they work. Not from these conspiracy sources, but from the actual people who've helped develop them. Actual people who work with these things. I did this myself, not because I'm skeptical to vaccines, because I'm not. I really like vaccines. I'm like, get it all in me, But learning some basics about how they work can maybe help demystify it a little bit. And I watched this because I just think it's fascinating. I love science. I love learning. And I was thinking, wow, this actually could be very helpful for people who are confused and scared of vaccines to watch. Kind of like how I use my podcast to talk about the science of recovery to help people feel a little bit less scared about the whole thing. So again, just a recommendation. And I know this is a little bit off topic, but I also know that I am running a podcast related to health and science. And I have an audience where I know a lot of you may be vulnerable and there is a pandemic. So I felt like it was the least I could do is just to add this little reminder and use my unfortunate experience of currently having COVID to hopefully have at least maybe one person reconsider going through this unvaccinated. I've been so cautious and I still got COVID. Triple vaccinated, avoiding, crowds, only staying with my few closest people, wearing mask everywhere. One of the few people in my university wore a mask and I still got it. Like at this point, it's very, very difficult to avoid it. And it's just such a shame because I'm thinking about the people who are medically vulnerable and my heart is breaking. I don't necessarily think you need to understand vaccines to take a vaccine. There are so many things I don't understand, yet I enjoy benefiting from it. I don't understand electricity, but I'm still very happy when I turn on the light. The light actually comes on, right? But I also know that for some people, it can, help them feel a little bit less scared. Also, the flu jab. I don't understand why not more people get the flu jab. I got it the first time when I had anorexia because I was a bit more vulnerable. And then I got it when I was working in healthcare because my patients were more vulnerable. And now I get it because I don't want the flu and I don't want to spread around the flu. Literally cost me like 12 quid at my local Boots and took 10 minutes, no pain or anything. So yeah, I was very happy I did that. Because apparently there's like a flu season in the UK as well now. Great. Yeah, the whole thing is just sad, really. Like, when I think about how the government has handled this, it's an absolute joke. And we can't really blame individuals at this point, right? You can do everything right and still get COVID. Anyways, guys, let's get over to the topic of today, because I know this was a long introduction here, but I felt it was important. So today we are going to talk about extreme hunger. Once again, I feel like this is one of my most spoken about topics at this point, but I know you guys love it and I know you guys always want to know more about it. And we're going to talk about extreme hunger and why do I still have extreme hunger? Why did my extreme hunger come back? Why hasn't it ended? Why hasn't it followed the perfect, predictable path? Help me! So first off, I want to say this. Where did you get it from that extreme hunger follows a perfect, predictable path? Because it doesn't. Extreme hunger is messy, it's unpredictable. It comes and then it goes and then it just comes and slaps you in the face again. That's the nature of extreme hunger. And that's the nature of recovery as well. Recovery is unpredictable. Does not follow a perfect graph. You have good days, you have bad days, you have days where things are easy and then suddenly you want to quit. That is how recovery works. Oh, wouldn't we all love if recovery and extreme hunger and every weird thing that happened in recovery just follow this perfect, predictable pattern, right? We all would love that. But what part of you is it that really, really wants that? It is the eating disorder part. It is the rigid part that want that control and predictability. And the whole definition of recovery is that it is unpredictable. You can't quite know. You need to embrace the unknown. And ironically, in this podcast, I'm going to make it a little bit less unknown for you. But in general, you can listen to this podcast, read as much as you want. You're never really going to feel 100% safe, right? You have to embrace the unknown, the scary, the unpredictable, the uncontrollable to actually recover. So first of all, with extreme hunger, I think it is a bit of a misconception a lot of people have that extreme hunger is something that only happens when someone is quote unquote underweight. And there's a lot to unpack here. So first of all, underweight, if you go by BMI, that's not really a good measure for someone being underweight, because underweight, essentially someone can be underweight at a BMI that's not clinically underweight because they're underweight for their set point weight. I've spoken about this before. We all have a natural, flexible weight range where our bodies thrive optimally, and that's different for everyone. So someone can be underweight for their body without being underweight per BMI. And second of all, someone can be not underweight for their body and still experience extreme hunger. Because although being underweight for your set point may be a driver for extreme hunger, essentially your body is detecting, oh, wait, there is less body fat on this body than I am happy with. So let's drive up certain things, let's have the leptin levels being completely out of whack just to make you eat and restore to this balance. Actually, I wouldn't even say out of whack. I would say that the leptin levels are doing exactly what they're programmed to, which is to maintain your body weight within your set point range. It's literally a famine response that human beings have had since the beginning of humanity, right? It's how we have survived famine. We need to eat more in response to starvation. It's so logical. Yet with the eating disorder, it goes all of these mental gymnastics about, no, actually, I am eating because I feel empty inside. No, you're hungry. Darling, you are hungry. But anyways, guys, so essentially what I'm saying is that being underweight relative to your set point weight might be a driver for extreme hunger, but it's not the only driver. And also a lot of people who are underweight for their set point weight don't necessarily have extreme hunger. Extreme hunger is often something that comes when someone starts recovery. It's almost like the hunger gets turned on again, right? But also a lot of people have extreme hunger during their eating disorder. For instance, me, I had anorexia nervosa binge purge subtype, so I was binging during my eating disorder. But for some people, the extreme hunger really hits in recovery. So what is very important to say is that someone can be at a quote-unquote healthy weight for their body, again, not by BMI, because BMI is bullshit, and still be restricting. This could be mental or physical restriction. So let me go through those. What is mental restriction? What is physical restriction? And also these very often overlap, but this would just be like a brief distinction. So physical restriction is essentially, as it probably sounds, restricting your energy intake. So that could be through restricting calories or restricting, certain foods, such as, let's say, restricting carbohydrates. You're not getting enough carbohydrates in your body, or restricting fats, right? But also exercising and burning off calories. It could be excessive exercise. It could be exercising too soon in recovery when you're still in a phase where rest and repair would be the optimal option. And also when I say restriction, I think a lot of people have this idea that restriction looks like eating like very, very, very minimal amounts of food. But actually, restriction in recovery can be eating a quote unquote normal amount of food when you actually need more than a normal amount of food. For example, if I was in recovery and I was eating 2,000 calories a day, that would be restriction for me because I needed 3,000 calories. And then there are people who in recovery need 5,000 calories, and 3,000 calories would be restriction for them. And this is a difficult one because I know a lot of people there, for instance, they think they should eat 2,000. Maybe they have a meal plan from a dietitian that aren't completely familiar with these things. And I've just given them like a general meal plan. And then they're like, oh my God, I have extreme hunger. But why? I'm eating 2,000 calories. And it's like, yeah, it seems like your body is asking for a bit more than that. And that's completely okay. This 2,000 calories number, I mean, I could make a whole podcast episode debunking it, and I probably will in the future. It's essentially a myth. And also in recovery, you need more than a quote unquote normal amount. And also 2,000 calories is quite little also for recovered or energy balanced people. So yeah, again, if you are someone who is physically restricting either through eating too little energy or too little of, for instance, fats, carbohydrates. And I say this because I see some people who are in recovery and they're like, oh, but I'm eating X amount of calories. But then they're actually eating low carb, and then they're wondering why they get extreme hunger on bread. But yeah, if this is you, then that really explains why you're very hungry, right? And also the same goes with exercise, as mentioned. And now let's move over to mental restriction. Mental restriction is the sneakier bit, right? And I know I've spoken about this before, and I will definitely talk more about it again, because this is what essentially when I work with clients, this is where a lot of the work is. Basically trying to filter out and pull out those sneaky mental restrictions that often are even overlooked in the traditional treatment system for an eating disorder, because a lot of these behaviors are normalized. They kind of go under the radar. Mental restriction is essentially those tiny things that may not really be causing an energy deficit, but it's the sneaky behaviors that reinforce the eating disorder. It is picking a protein bar when you really want chocolate. It might have the same amount of calories, but you're making a choice because you feel like the chocolate is bad and you're banning yourself from the chocolate. And then, of course, what will happen to many people is that when they have access to the chocolate, they will binge on it because this is their one and only chance to get access to the chocolate, right? Forbidden fruit tastes the sweetest. You're putting a food on a pedestal by banning yourself from it. It's going to be way more exciting. I used this example before, but it's like if you have a little child, right? And they're in a room full of toys, and you just take one random toy and you put it up on a shelf and you say, you can't have this toy. The child is going to start obsessing about that toy that is put on the shelf. If you just left the toy with all the other toys, the child would probably want to play a bit with that toy and a bit with the others, right? It wouldn't be as exciting. This is such a basic aspect of human psychology. And it's very unfortunate that a lot of the advice that I read about, binging, and I use binging not as in a negative way. I just use binging in the same way that I use extreme hunger, reactive hunger. So when I'm talking about binging, the way that I'm using it, and I know a lot of people in recovery space use binging differently, but the way I use it is just a neutral word explaining eating a lot of food in a short period of time and feeling out of control about it. So yeah, anyways, a lot of the advice surrounding binging is, okay, if you binge on this and that food, that is a food that you can't control yourself around, and therefore you should avoid it. My approach, which has been shown through working with people to be a lot more effective, is if you're binging on a particular food, you should eat more of it. You should surround yourself with that food. You should demystify that food. Will you end up eating a lot of that food in the beginning? Yeah. I have people all the time who they have a specific fear food that they feel like they can't control themselves around. They say, oh, I spent weeks eating this food every single day, several times a day. It's normal. You kind of have to rebellion your way through it, right? And eventually it becomes just a food, right? And eventually you can make an informed decision. Maybe one day you crave the protein bar and another day you crave the chocolate. So this is mental restriction at its essence. And mental restriction, again, can show up in these very, very, very sneaky ways. Even more sneaky than, choosing the protein bar over the chocolate when you want the chocolate, because that is more of an obvious one. That's more of an easy one, right? It can show up as food perfectionism, like, oh, I can eat chocolate, but only if I eat it in a perfect comfort of my own home. The lights need to be perfectly dimmed. I need to watch the perfect show. I can't just grab a chocolate on the go, right? No, no, no. Also, sneaky things such as, you're buying a yogurt and you're just telling yourself, I just really like the low-fat version. And don't get me wrong, some people do. But you also know that there's a little bit of eating disorder sprinkled around here, right? Several things can be true at once. You can really enjoy the low-fat yogurt, but also if the high-fat one had the exact same flavor and consistency, but had the same amount of, calories or fat content, would you like that one as well? And also, even if it doesn't, are you okay eating the higher fat version? Is that something that gives you anxiety? Is that something that brings up a mindset of, oh my God, I'm wasting calories? Again, can you see? This is typical examples of mental restriction. And again, can you see how these behaviors very often will fly under the radar in traditional eating disorder treatment? Especially if there is a treatment practitioners who haven't had an eating disorder themselves, they won't very often won't even notice these things. And this is where I come into the picture to annoy my clients. They thank me later though. So yeah, if you notice that you catch yourself just binging uncontrollably on certain foods, ask yourself, are you in any way having restrictive mindsets or behaviors around these foods? For example, do you have a rule that you can only eat chocolate on a Friday evening in your room? And then when you have access to that chocolate, obviously because you told yourself this is your only chance, it's going to be way more exciting. The best to do would be to actually just have the chocolate available throughout the week. So you can maybe have some for your coffee, or maybe have some just because you craved it after dinner, right? Will you maybe end up certain times having chocolate for breakfast? Yeah, that's a normal part of recovery. Okay, so now I explained some common reasons why someone still have extreme hunger. But I will also say this, even if you are not restricting in any way and you are not underweight for your body, but you are someone who's in recovery, it's completely normal that extreme hunger comes and goes a bit. You can do everything, right. And I don't even like that word, because recovery is it's not some kind of game where you need to get it right, but you can do all of these things that I mentioned. You can really be investigating your mental and physical restrictions. You can be resting, eating enough, and still experience extreme hunger, because extreme hunger is a normal part of recovery. It's not really something you can outsmart. Okay, and I want to describe an observation I've made, and this is an observation. This is not something I have a scientific paper to back up. This is something I have just witnessed from working with clients. I very often see a tendency that when I start working with a client and when they start going more, all in, or whatever people call it, they experience extreme hunger. And then extreme hunger kind of wanes off a little bit. And then towards the later phases of their recovery, extreme hunger suddenly comes back. This doesn't happen to everyone. It's just a pattern that I've seen in quite a few people. And if this is not your pattern, I don't want you to be like, oh my God, now I'm doing something wrong. Because again, extreme hunger manifests different in everyone. Some people have extreme hunger once, just for 2 weeks, and then it goes away. Other people have it throughout their whole recovery. It's all normal. But I've noticed that it is common for it to kind of come and then go and then come back. And people experiencing a rebound in extreme hunger very often freak out and think that they have done something wrong. They will come to a session with me or text me and be like, what is going on? What have I done wrong? And it's just why did you think extreme hunger was going to be so predictable, right? Why did you think it was just going to be like a guest that exactly when it's going to come and go? That's not how extreme hunger works. Extreme hunger will just knock on your door, break down your door, whether you want it or not, and then it will suddenly leave. That's how it works. Sometimes you can identify why extreme hunger made a comeback or why it is there, Other times you can't really do that. A last thing that I would mention is I have noticed with clients, and also this is something that, has scientific basis to it. Extreme hunger can sometimes make a bit of a comeback if you are someone who menstruates and have lost your period. I see people sometimes experiencing extreme hunger when their period is on its way back. And me now, as someone who's been recovered for many years, I still notice that I get more hungry, I would say the week before my period. This is very, very common. So if you're someone who menstruates and you notice that extreme hunger comes with maybe mood changes, maybe your skin breaks out a bit more, maybe you have tender breasts, maybe notice some of these things, then it could be that it is something going on with your hormones and that the period is on its way. I had this myself. I remember I was in recovery. I was in like the later stages of recovery. I was in I had just become quote unquote weight restored. And I suddenly was hit by extreme hunger. And I was like, oh my God, what is going on? And also my mood was off. I was just feeling off. And then my period came and I was like, oh, that's amazing. And I remember how grateful I was for my body, for what it was doing for me. And like, oh, you know what you were doing with this extreme hunger, right? I do also think that, and I know I mentioned this a little bit earlier, sometimes there is a confusion between hunger and extreme hunger. Like sometimes I hear people saying, oh my God, I ate 2 portions of dinner. Is this extreme hunger? What's going on? And it's like, sometimes we're all hungry, especially going through eating disorder recovery, especially also the phase after eating disorder recovery, when your metabolism is elevated. It's completely normal. And other times we just have a bit more food because food is good. You see people without eating disorders doing this all the time. We don't need to always, medicalize everything. If you have extreme hunger, trust that your body knows what it's doing. Be mindful of what kind of foods you have extreme hunger on. Are these foods that maybe you should implement more of? For example, if you notice your extreme hunger is just centered towards bread and pasta, then maybe more carbohydrates should be a good idea. Maybe more bread and pasta should be a good idea throughout the day. And also, even if you are eating it throughout the day, chances are maybe you've restricted yourself from this in the past. And it's going to take a bit of time for your body to realize it's just bread. It's just pasta. In recovery, we are a bit like rebellious teenagers. When teenagers start drinking alcohol and it's like really fun and exciting. I remember this myself when I was like young and I started drinking alcohol. It was very fun and exciting because I felt like I was doing something forbidden. But then when I became older, it just lost that appeal because it was no longer forbidden. And I also remember my parents were not really strict at all with alcohol. So for me, it lost its appeal very quickly. But my friends who had very strict parents, they kept acting out and they kept being very excited by drinking because they needed to like hide it from their parents. But because my parents were pretty chill about it, it didn't hit the same for me, right? Again, basic human psychology. You are not developing some kind of weird food addiction. I mean, we all are food addicted to some extent. We all need to eat food, right? But using the addiction approach to food in the same way that, for instance, drug addiction, it's not really productive. And it's not really like, if you just look at how the brain and body work, it doesn't fit the same model, right? Essentially, with drug addiction, if you're addicted to a specific drug, the solution would be to take away the drug. But if you feel like you're addicted to chocolate because you keep restricting yourself from it, then the solution would be to eat more chocolate, right? So again, it's a completely different solution. That's why I think when people are using the addiction approach towards food and binging, it very seldom works, at least not long term. And it's so interesting because, let's talk about sugar for a second, because I know that's one of those things that always get this rap of being addictive. I read a study the other day and it showed that sugar, again, kind of just debunking the whole thing that, sugar is as addictive as cocaine, right? And it showed that in studies in rats, that the only rats that showed these like addictive like behaviors to sugar were rats that had been food deprived and deprived of that sugar. When you're deprived, you show these signs of almost being like an addict. And I know for myself, like when I had my eating disorder, I would like go to the grocery store and be almost like an addict looking for a hit, right? I would be, it was very much acting like a drug addict with my binging and purging. But the treatment approach is the complete opposite. You can cut out a drug, but you can't cut out food because food is something we actually need. We don't need cocaine to live. We need food, right? Restriction and deprivation causes increased food-seeking behavior, meaning that you will seek out food whether you eat it or whether you just obsess with it. It's kind of the same thing, actually. So you see a lot of people with eating disorders may not feel physically hungry, but they will hyper-obsess about food and collect recipes, spend hours looking at food porn online, all of these things. This is food-seeking behavior. And it's common that in recovery, the food-seeking behavior for some people may go from being obsessing about food to actual extreme hunger. It is normal. It is basic human biology. You are not flawed. You are not broken. You're experiencing the most common thing in human history, literally how human beings have survived famine for thousands of years. I hope you found this somewhat reassuring. And now I'm going to take a listener question. So the question goes, Amalia, thank you so very much for making this wonderful podcast. It is helping me tons. I have a question you might want to address on your podcast. I've been with my partner for almost a year now. I'm just started opening up more about my eating disorder, which is making me really insecure. I just don't know how much is too much. Should I tell him when I'm anxious in a certain situation? Would love to hear you talk about it. Please keep going. Lots of love. This is such an important question. And I think because it is such an important question, it would be something that I would dedicate a whole episode to. And I already have created some content on this. If you go to my Instagram, letsrecover.co.uk, and you click on the IGTV videos, you will find a live that I did probably like a year ago now, where I was talking about supporting someone with an eating disorder. I'm wearing a white blouse in that video, if that helps someone find it. Essentially, what I tend to encourage people is open communication. At the same time, there is a little bit of a trap here that some people fall into when they do that, and that is open communication that ends up being their partner or parent or friend almost validating the eating disorder. So let me use an example. Imagine if you're opening up about your fear of, sugar, right? And then your partner or friend says, yeah, I completely understand. Sugar is really scary. That can be unproductive. So this is something that I encourage you when you are talking with your partner, and also if someone listening now talking with their family or friends or whatsoever about supporting them, be mindful of, how you present it. Don't want people to validate your eating disorder. You want people to listen, to be supportive, to understanding without validating your eating disorder. And a way to ask for this could be to say, hey, I know that my fears are irrational and that it is actually helpful when you remind me they're irrational rather than justifying them. But at the same time, you also don't want someone to remind you that they are irrational in a really condescending way, right? So imagine if you fear sugar and you have a partner saying, that's ridiculous. That's not nice either, because that just makes you feel kind of silly. So what I would recommend is communicate to your partner how you like to be supported. Don't expect your partner to know, because eating disorders are so complicated to understand for someone who's never been through it. And if you can actually communicate what for you is supportive, that's the best thing you can do, really. Don't expect your partner to mind read and to just intuitively know because they love you, because that's not how it works. I work very often with families and I see the most loving parent who often knows tons about eating disorders, and they still would catch themselves that they said or did something that was triggering, because it's almost impossible not to do that. So this will take me to the other point, which is don't expect perfection. There will be said and done things that feels wrong. And when that happens, I would encourage bringing it up in a non-accusatory manner. So imagine your partner responded to your fear of sugar by saying, yeah, I completely understand that. Sugar can be really addictive, A good way to address it could be to say, hey, so when you said that, for me, because of my eating disorder, I interpreted that as blah, 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 rather than, you are justifying my eating disorder. How could you do this? You're on team with the eating disorder. You're being triggering. You're ruining my recovery. Can you see there's a difference? Focus on how certain things make you feel rather than assuming that they have bad intentions, because they probably don't. They want to be supportive. They want to be helpful. And also, I want to remind you that we all like to be supported in different ways. Some people like their partner to take a bit more of a passive approach. Other people like a partner to be more involved. So it's so important that you communicate how you like to be supported. I know that I've just responded some general ways, like people tend not to like this and people tend to like that. But it's essentially you who need to decide. For example, some people love when their partner or friends or family are pushing them a bit. For instance, saying, yeah, we're going to have lunch today, you're going to join. Other people find that very, very harmful when someone is feeling like they're being pushed a bit. So communicate this with the people around you. Communicate with them. I swear I spend so much time when I work with families and the clients experience something with someone. I always say, let people know how they can best support you. And also, assume that people want to support you. Don't assume that people are against you, looking to be destructive. Assume that the people who love you want the best for you and that they are on your team, that they are willing to support you. Think of it for yourself. Imagine if you had someone in your life that was going through something that you didn't quite know much about. Wouldn't it be a relief if they could tell you, hey, when you do this, that makes me feel really good. This is very helpful and supportive for me. Thank you. Rather than just, expecting you to instinctively know or not letting you know at all. You've been with your partner for almost a year. And, if it is a nice and healthy relationship, then your partner should be willing to listen to your vulnerabilities and your insecurities and will want to support you. It's important to strike a balance here because you also don't want your partner to become almost like your therapist or your savior, right? So I think this is another thing that's important to mention. Don't expect your partner to fix you. And also clearly communicate this to your partner, because sometimes I've seen this and also experienced it firsthand. When going through something, there is a friend or a partner or a parent, they go into the role of savior, right? And then when they can't save you and can't fix you, they get almost resentful towards you. They're like, I'm doing all of this work to fix you. Why are you not receptive? When actually it's not their job. I've experienced this in friendships and relationships, and it's been so destructive. The people who I've found most supportive throughout my life has been the people who've been able to hold me but not carry me, if that makes sense. People who've been supporting me and actually listening to what I need instead of trying to come in and take a role that's not theirs. Okay, my answer is getting a little bit long now, so I will definitely do another episode about this. But I hope that was at least covering a little bit of it. So essentially, communicate and have realistic expectations. I hope you guys enjoy this episode, and I hope you're all staying safe and healthy and well. And yeah, see you guys next week.